Welcome, everyone. Today is Wednesday, April 16th. Time is 3:33. Welcome to the Lost Pines Groundwater Conservation District Board meeting. And with that, if you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the Texas Pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the Texas flag. Thank you. Is there anyone signed up for public comments? We haven't received any. Anyone online with public comments? Seeing none. Then we will continue to agenda item 3, the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are routine and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion or action on these items unless requested by a board director. Would any of the board like to pull anything out or any questions on these items? If not, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second. All right, motion made by Director Cole and seconded by Director Textor. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Regular agenda item 4A, announcements. I do have an announcement because I was looking for our videos a couple of weeks ago, and our videos are on our YouTube channel. So the recordings for these meetings, if you go to the YouTube channel and you search for Lost Pines, you'll see our recordings there. I believe Jim is going to start linking them back to our webpage, but if you don't see
Do you know exactly how they're listed on YouTube?
No, probably usually by date.
You mean the channel name, or do you mean the?
I mean, it always sounds real simple. Just go to the YouTube channel, but I'll go there and I'll put in Lost Pines, the Groundwater Conservation District, and
It should pop up. That's what it's.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, I just searched for Lost Pines Groundwater Conservation District.
they're still on our page too, right? Which is where I always find them.
No,
They're
no,
not.
they weren't. I went looking for a couple weeks ago for our recordings for the link, but they were not on our webpage.
I'll get that fixed.
So Jim's gonna link it. Jim will put the link, but in the meantime, you can find them always at our YouTube channel. Is there any update, Bobby, on who's online? I asked our council just to be online since this meeting should be a short one today. So my question to Bobby is regarding Rambo. Any update on the Rambo hearing?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Okay, yes, the Rambo preliminary hearing is scheduled for May 6th at the Lost Pines offices. I believe it's at 1:30 p.m. It's in the afternoon.
Thank you. Anyone else with any announcements? Okay, then we'll move on to regular agenda item 4B, the presentation by LRE Water regarding Aquifers 101. This item came out of hearing, a board meeting about 2-3 months ago where Claire had asked for a presentation on this topic. And so, hello, Dr. Miller. You should all have a hard copy on the dais.
Jim is pulling this up. Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to speak. Most of the board knows me, but my name is Gretchen Miller. I am an engineer and a hydrogeologist with LRE Water, and we are the hydrogeological consultants to the district. And today I want to go over groundwater and aquifers 101. So we have two general things to cover, a little bit of generalized background about aquifers to set the stage for some discussion about the particular aquifers in the district. And also, I would have a few slides in here to answer our open forum some of the questions that I've heard from the board and from the public over the past few months that I've been coming. So if at any time, I'm happy to have you all stop me, ask a question, circle back around. Not advancing.
2 hours.
Good. Sorry, I am an engineer. All right, so I think most of you are familiar, but just a thought about what groundwater actually is. So when we refer to groundwater, we're talking about water that's found in the void spaces of the geology. And in some places in Texas, that is void spaces between sediments or grades. And in some places in Texas, that's void spaces that are fractures. So for example, like a Carrizo sand is void spaces between grades, whereas the Edwards aquifer is void spaces fractures in a carbonate aquifer. So we also say that these void spaces need to be filled or saturated with water. And that matters for how the flow behaves, how the water moves. Because when they're mixed with water and air, we're not talking groundwater, but something more like soil moisture. So more specifically, when we say what is an aquifer, we're talking about one of these water-bearing formations or groups of formations. We have several aquifer systems here in the district. And these usually have significant quantities of water associated with them. So when we talk about pumping them, we talk about being able to develop really large water supplies or large wells. While we can put a well into something that's not an aquifer, it usually is not very productive. Maybe it can supply a household or two, but typically an aquifer needs to be able to supply a community or a city or large regions. And the other part about being an aquifer is that the water typically has to be drinkable to be considered an aquifer, like usable for some important. So just real quick, the state designates two types of aquifers in Texas. What they say are major aquifers, so big, regional, large productive supplies. And what they say are minor aquifers, small, more isolated, less productive, either in a more localized area or in producing water in smaller quantities. And Lost Pines has both of these types of aquifers. So important to note, particularly for our district, is how aquifers are described and visualized. One concept you probably have heard a lot is this idea of a subcrop or an outcrop, or down dip or up dip. And the reason it's important here in particular, and this is an example from the Carrizo Wilcox aquifer, where we have what we call cross section. This is somewhat south of here, but the BB section there is probably closest to what we see in the district. And the idea is that certain formations daylight in certain places, but that all of these formations slope toward the Gulf. So blown up a little bit, this is, you can see, the yellow is the Gulf Coast aquifer, and it tends to be over everything. We aren't into the Gulf Coast aquifer where we are here, but where this cross section was drawn, it's on top. And then as you get older and older, geologic sediments that were deposited, the earliest are on the bottom and the latest are on the top, right? And they deposit on top of each other, and then the whole thing slopes. So what this looks like for Lost Pines. Okay, this is LRE's model of the aquifers of Lost Pines. We visualized all of this in 3D. And at the top here, you see the different layers, right? All those layers that are sloping. You see them at the surface, right? And so let's take the purple, the Yawa Jackson, and you see how in the southern portions of both counties coming to the surface. And then when you look at it from a side view, you see as it's on the top for quite a bit. This is like looking this way, right? Because they're all sloping in this sort of direction. The two dots are Giddings and Bastrop on there. Looking at this from another angle, so we've rotated the counties here, you can really see that down dip towards of each of these layers towards the goal, right? So an outcrop here, I'm not showing up. Let's look at the green, which is the Queen City Stand. You can see how you see a little sliver of it when you're looking at the top view of the plan view. See a little sliver of it coming through the two counties. But when you look where it is in the subsurface, it is quite deep, right? You see a fairly sizable portion. So everything to the left here of that, in that green, is known as the subcrop, whereas all of what you see on the surface is known as the outcrop, right? So the aquifer has a series of outcrops, outcrops and subcrops, right? As you stack those layers on top of each other. We have a particularly layered system here too. There are quite a number of distinct, what we would call formations, geological formations with it. One of the other things I wanted to talk about when we're talking about what aquifers are present is this idea of, does the water in the aquifer need to be drinkable to call it an aquifer? Well, recently the thinking on that has changed a bit, partly due to water scarcity. And the Water Development Board has said, well, technically we could think of all of these places that we previously discounted as having water that's too saline or too salty to drink. We could think of those as maybe, we should start looking at those because with a little bit of treatment, they could be usable as well. And so the state's put in this brackish aquifer characterization system program that has characterized the aquifer, the brackish portions of the aquifer. So I don't think this is something that the district is dealing with yet, but it's something to maybe think about how you all might want to handle that. Should that start becoming a plausible water supply? Talking a little bit more about some concepts. We get this term a lot about water table. So what is a water table, or what is the groundwater level? And we just had some of our techs out in the field last week measuring the water levels as part of the monitoring program you all set up. So I'm thinking about this recently. We have sort of two states that the aquifer can be in. And a lot of this depends on whether the aquifer is in that outcrop region or whether you're measuring in the subcrop or the down dip. Okay, so when you're in the outcrop area, in the up dip, it tends not to be pressurized, right? So if you put a well into the aquifer, the first water level you encounter is the water level in the aquifer itself, right? And that's what you're measuring. Okay, that's also called an unconfined aquifer, or the unconfined portion of the aquifer. This is like water. You can think of this as like water in a sewer or a hopefully not a sewer. Let's picture stormwater a stormwater drain, right? This is just water kind of freely flowing down a channel. However, if you think about your water distribution main, right, if you poked a hole in that, it would be pressurized and it would send a big geyser up, right? When you poke a hole in a confined aquifer, well, they don't send the geysers up anymore, although some of them used to. But the water level rises to essentially balance out the pressure. And that's what we mean when we say the confined aquifer. And so really you can think about that water level in a well as being above confining layer. Probably need an illustration for that. We'll get that one later. So the way we visualize this is a contour plot that shows the water table over space, right? So any of you been Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and seen a topographic map, right? Gone hiking. This is the topographic map of the water table. This is just an example. This is not in the. So the board roughly keeps track of water tables in Texas through a monitoring program, similar to yours, but not quite as precise. And you can see this map that the Water Development Board has developed for water level decline over time. So this is another way to think about water levels, as in change of water levels. And you see that Trinity is really in distress up near Dallas-Fort Worth. And there's two reasons this looks so dramatic. One, I mean, because they've used a lot of water. And two, because it's a confined aquifer. And a confined aquifer responds disproportionately to pumping. And I'll show you a little bit later. Go ahead and skip. One thing to remember, water flows downhill. You know that intuitively, right? And all of our aquifer materials oppose that movement, right? They have water flows through a pipe and the pipe sides cause friction. Water flows through porous media, all this sand, and that sand causes friction. And the way we represent that is in this idea of hydraulic conductivity. Okay, so this is a parameter, or this is a number that we measure in the aquifer and helps tell us how fast, or how, I shouldn't say how fast, how easily things move. So the higher the number, the easier it is to pump. The higher the number, the faster water moves in the aquifer. And this is really similar to another term you might have heard before, which is transmissivity. And the difference between the two is the difference between how fast things could move and how much room there is to do that. So we multiply by the aquifer thickness to get, this is how much could flow across the whole thickness of the aquifer. So a lot of times when we talk about it, we'll talk about that transmissivity. The way engineers predict how much, and geoscientists, don't want to leave it. The way we predict how fast this is going to move is basically just saying this flow rate scales with conductivity and gradient. So you remember I showed you the picture before of the water table where it had high elevation and a low elevation. That gradient represents that. That's the gradient, the high elevation to low. Okay, so we have to have two things to have groundwater flowing. We have the conductivity, which is the limit on how fast it can move, and then the gradient, which is how much there is pushing, essentially. Okay, the other term we want to use when we talk about aquifer materials are sediments. Okay, and the reason is all of the aquifers that we talk about in the district are what we call sedimentary aquifers. And in fact, most aquifers are sedimentary because it's a good material to have to store water in. Now, sediments are pieces of former rocks that have eroded from elsewhere, or weathered materials that have been transported. And we like to think of them as rocks in the making, right? So to make a rock, you have to take all these loose materials and put pressure and chemical changes on them to make them into something that will be cohesive together, right? Sediments, if I were to have them here, I would need them in a jar, right? Whereas a rock, I could just set on the table. This is also important because the district has aquifers that are range from quite possibly truly a rock to almost entirely a sediment. And this is because we have so many layers here, right? And the deeper you go, the more pressure you're going to have on that material, and the more likely you are going to have become a rock, right? So the more consolidated materials tend to be at the bottom of the sequence, and the less consolidated are at the top. Why this matters is goes right back to that hydraulic conductivity, right? The bigger sediments that you have, the more likely it is that you will have a higher hydraulic conductivity, so a higher ability to flow. So sands tend to have higher conductivity than silts and higher conductivity in clays. So when we talk about the aquifer and the aquifer layers, right, versus the confining layers, we're talking about the difference between a sand aquifer and a clay confining layer. And as for how much of a rock it is versus how much of a sediment it is, we have the further along it is towards rock, the smaller the pore spaces tend to be, and the less connected. And so a sandstone will tend to have a slightly lower porosity and a slightly lower hydraulic conductivity than a sand, for example. You know, also talk about how aquifers respond to pumping. And again, this goes back to our consolidated, or not consolidated, this goes back to our confined versus unconfined. The way an aquifer responds to pumping really comes down to that, because, you know, what we look at when we talk about pumping is this drawdown, okay? And drawdown is controlled by pumping rate, conductivity, and the presence of other water sources in the area. When we talk about how much drawdown, say, approving a permit, right? We talk about how much drawdown is going to be caused by that well. We predict that either with the computer model, which is ModFlow based, and Bill's run that model quite a bit. Bill Hutchinson's run that model quite a bit, right? We're working on that computer-based one that's going to be your local model. Or we can predict that by a mathematical equation. Probably the less I say about the math, the better, although I did put, for any of the other engineers, I did put the equation on. It's a nice differential. So we solved this equation to figure out what drawdown is, S, for, you see a Q there, that's the flow rate, that's the pumping rate of the well, and T, which is that transmissivity, right? So the big takeaway from this is that drawdown increases with time since pumping and decreases with distance or proximity to the pumping, okay? And we get what we call this cone of depression. Probably see a little better here, right? The closer you are to the well, the more drawdown. The further away, the less. And the closer you are to another water source or a recharge source, the less drawdown you're going to have. And we can see it in nearby wells. This is just an example of the seasonal pumping that can happen in areas that do irrigated agriculture. And the further away, so borehole 3 blue and borehole 1 red are separated by some geology, but you can still see there is that signal, even if it's not quite as dry. Okay, so on to the confined versus unconfined. The unconfined aquifers the important thing to understand here is that when we pump out of them, the pores are drained. You know, so the pores that we were talking about earlier, the spaces between all the sediments, they get empty. Water is literally taken away from them. In an unconfined aquifer, we have a little bit different behavior, right? Because essentially, like we have these confining beds. If we start at a water table that's higher than those confining beds, right? What we call artesian, and we start pumping, that water level drops fairly dramatically, because what we're actually doing is relieving the pressure in the aquifer, as opposed to extracting water from the pores. Now, if we kept pumping, we would unconfine, I don't know if I like that word, we would no longer have a confined aquifer, right? We would turn our confined aquifer into an unconfined aquifer if we took enough water out. Okay, and so we have to get all of that pressure out first. The water literally just decompresses, right? It's been in there under pressure, it's spurting up. We allow pumping for long enough, and that becomes unconfined, right? And that is a situation that when we're managing confined aquifers, that is usually the big red flag, right? When the aquifer goes to that unconfined condition in an area that had previously been. Okay, so a little bit about how all of this relates to your aquifer. Really fundamentally, they are all coastal formations. Okay, and well, this is not oceanfront property here, right? 60 million years ago, though, it was, right? So we talk about having coastal aquifers here because they were subject to coastal processes when they were deposited, right? So sands tend to deposit at the very edge where the coast meets the rivers and the deltas, right? They're the first things that get deposited because they're heavy and they fall out of the water, right? The further you go out onto the continental shelf, the more likely you are to start depositing silts and clays. So the smaller and smaller particle sizes. And then at some point you start forming limestones. Okay, those are the biological matter that's hitting the bottom. Okay, so as the coast comes in and out, right, here 60 million years ago, as it's going in and out, we have a progression of sometimes it's depositing sands and sometimes it's depositing clays. Okay, and when we talk about clay lenses or sand layers in any of these aquifers, we're thinking about this sequence of the Gulf coming in and out. Right now, I say it like it's tides. It's not tides. It's essentially millions of years that this process is happening, right? And we're seeing the result. Okay, so when we talk about the formations, we typically start at the bottom, okay? And we have the oldest, deepest layers, and then we work our way up to the youngest layers. This is just how geologists think. There's nothing special about going in this procedure. But we start with the Carrizo-Wilcox. And when you look at the geology, I'm going to try to translate some of this into non-jargon for y'all. The Hooper Formation, we'll start there, is layered in beds, right? So the ocean going in and out, laying down these different beds. And some of these are beds of sandstone, and they are typically formed with carbonate materials in this one. So either something that's weathered from limestone or has been in that portion of the ocean that we had limestone, right? Or we had limestone being deposited. It's interbedded to some extent with lignite, or essentially coal. That's a simplified version, but coal, basically. Nothing that we can mined with a coal mine, but coal that has been mined with wells before. And then shale, which is mud made rock. Okay, so being the deepest, this one is much closer to rocks than not. The conductivity values range from what I would consider pretty small here, the 0.04 feet per day. Not as small as like, say, the clays, like the Reclaw Formation, which is our confining layer. So this still moves water, but fairly small. When we map this though, we see that it's very thick. So the combination of that thickness multiplied by that conductivity means it does have a fairly good transmission. Not necessarily the highest you see, but decent. Okay, so we're looking at conductivity and thickness as two measures of how water might be moving through. We move upwards to the Simsboro. It is the second oldest and deepest, right? And we call it a massive sandstone. I mean, I feel like that's fitting of its stature too, because it does get a lot of attention, and it is one of the most productive, or it is the most productive in the area, as measured by hydraulic conductivity, up to 46 feet per day. And we call it mass though. That is actually a geologic term, which means there's not distinct layering, right? So we don't see that on, off, on, off. While it was being deposited, things were a little more stationary. Right? And the sands in it are fine to medium grade, which means fine sand to medium sand. Medium sand is a little smaller than playground sand. You know, like what you'd have in your kid's sandbox. And it's well sorted, so all the grains are the same size. And those two things make it this high conductivity. Calvert Bluff, next up. It is classified in the same way that the Hooper was. Essentially, that sandstone formed or cemented with a carbonate material like limestone. There's lignite present, there's coal. Again, it's that bedding layers. And really, we see a very similar conductivity to the Hooper, that 0.03, so really fairly low value to a pretty good value. Again, thickness, almost 2,000 feet as a maximum. Now remember, the further we get to the south, the thicker the formation becomes, right? Because we have some of the thickness truncated here, right? And we've got the down dip here, right? If you think about the geometry. Carrizo up next, and it is a cross-headed sand, which means that while it was forming, there were things that made the sand make some pretty like wavy looking formations. I'm sorry, I forgot a picture on this. But if you've ever seen the sandstones out west in like some of the national parks that have those really pretty oranges and whites that are kind of swirling back and forth, that's what you picture for this. But again, not those nice solid rocks like you see out west. More, quite a bit crumblier. But the Carrizo here is thinner, but fairly high carbon. Queen City, only some thin bedding present. It's more massive. And it's mostly a fine to medium sand with some clay and some conglomerates, meaning a conglomerate is a rock containing a rock. So it's a bunch of like gravel-sized particles cemented together. Again, loosely cemented. Conductivity, not bad. Thickness, not as thick as we've seen.
Excuse me,
Uh-huh.
on the legend, the thickness,
Or did I have that?
no, I've just got a question.
Oh, sure.
Sort of like the green. How does that fit in?
The green is where there's no aquifer. Right, so the green is you're seeing the underlying. Yeah. And then you see an edge here that's the outcrop, and then the down. The Sparta's next, fine to medium sand, with some clay. Again, depends on where you are. Conductivity, the same range we've been seeing, 0.29, and then not as secure either, maximum of 300. And then we have the Wayward Jackson, and these we start to get a little bit more interesting rocks in these. Not that I don't love the sandstones, great aquifers. Sandstone's great. But here we start to see medium to fine sandstones and clays with lignite again, and then some gypsum, which can be really problematic for salinity, right? So it's calcium sulfate that gets dissolved into water and can cause water quality problems. And then the Jackson is clay and silt, and some of it is volcanic ash that has, remember I said parts of other rocks, right? This is a layer where volcanic ash was eroding from somewhere and brought to the location. And the tufaceous sand, that's like volcanic tuff that's been made in the sand. So a little bit of more interesting sense. And then again, this clay layer. It can get quite thick here in the district, but we've never regarded it as a major water source, right? We're in the outcrop portion at the southern portion here. All right. Then one last one, and I'm gonna call it an aquifer, but it is a body of subsurface water. The state has not designated an aquifer, but the Colorado alluvium can produce somewhat substantial volumes of water. It has a really high conductivity, higher than the rest, but it is not very thick. The maximum we see here is 143. And you see that's only really in still sporadic dark locations along. And this is all surrounding the river, so it is much younger than everything else. Young is relative. This is, less than 1 million years. But for how long the river has been in place, moving back and forth, depositing these floods and gravel bars, things along those lines. So these type of alluvium systems can be really productive, but they have to be recharged through the river, and typically, and they're much more circumspect in their geography. All right, so I think I probably have used so much. Apologies, I always go on here. But is there anything I can help answer for you all right now? So one thing I do want to add, maybe to help introduce the next agenda item a little bit, the operation, I didn't have a chance to put a slide on. But one thing we talk a lot about is recharge. And when we talk about recharge, we're usually talking about natural water moving into the aquifer. And this is, a natural process. It can make or break some aquifers, but it is also a very slow process, right? We're talking about inches per year at most, typically, particularly this area. Some of the aquifers in Houston can get higher than that, but inches per year is in your mind what thinking, right? So there have been new developments that have addressed trying to do this in an artificial way, right? If we're engineering our problem, right, by pumping too much, maybe we can engineer a solution by injecting water back into the aquifer. And so that we call artificial recharge. And there have been systems like that discussed throughout Texas. And you all have discussed this a few board meetings right? So in this idea, and what I think we're gonna talk about in a minute here is the idea of recharging some of the aquifer layers. Right, some of the deep portions of the aquifer, of, I believe the Carrizo, so our lower purple one here. So number 8, that lower purple one, in the deeper regions. The idea is to put water down in the opposite process that you would take water out, right? So put it down into the aquifer via a wall. And that's what's on the table and being proposed by Austin for the district. And so I will maybe leave it there, but it's this idea that we're putting water into the aquifer via.
But it's not exactly recharge, it's taken back out, right?
Well, yes, this is true. So the volume of water matters here. The idea is that in a lot of these systems, right, you can have a process where you're recharging it and you're increasing the volume, or you're storing it and you're taking it in and out, right? We don't really distinguish in the terminology, although a lot of times the state will call ASR aquifer storage and recovery versus just aquifer recharge. And you're absolutely right. That's an important distinction.
Do you know if the sites they have chosen as lower transmissivity or higher, they 24 feet per day, that would be a lot to control if we're moving that quickly.
Right, and there's an optimal way, or there's an optimal range of transmissivity values for an ASR system to have. I don't know specifics on the site yet. And that would certainly be one of the tests I would want to see from them, is what the overall conductivity and then the thickness of the zone.
It seems like that it could even potentially not be an acceptable site if it was super high transmissivity.
Exactly, yes. And hopefully, there have been some large picture studies that have looked at that across the state and said, these areas are probably too high, these areas are probably too low. In fact, not to cite myself, but to do one of those. But in order to really know for a system, you have to test it at the location where you intend. Mhm. Yeah, because there's so much variability. Mhm. It has to be heavily considered, and the water going in has to be heavily managed, right? So it has to have the right pH, the right alkalinity, and the right amount of oxygen in it, which is ideally none, right? So the less oxygen the more you can oxygenate the water, the better. So those are the three things. Because when you thank you for the leading question. When you have an aquifer that's this deep, right? All of the oxygen that was present when that water was originally deposited has since been used, right? We conceptualize these confined aquifers as generally being anoxic. So essentially, no oxygen is present in them because the bacteria have already consumed all of the oxygen. And then the bacteria present are anaerobic. I should say anaerobic to anaerobic. Be very careful.
It could also be deeper and fine, probably as well.
Mhm.
Because they're deeper into the ground and
Right, the water tends to be older as well, the deeper, and so that process has a longer time to have been managed. Also, like we said, the pores were filled, right? And so the only oxygen in those pores is what's dissolved in the water. And then if that's all consumed by microbes in the past, then that water has no oxygen. When you introduce oxygen into an aquifer via an aquifer storage and recovery project, you want to be careful not to, because then you get this whole series of reactions, either with the aquifer matrix or, with the aquifer materials, the particles, right, where you can change essentially the chemistry and start dissolving minerals you might not want.
Also, not just the mineral action, but just the space, because I'm envisioning, I think they're gonna be pumping it to a virtually empty aquifer. But what if that aquifer already has water? What if it doesn't have the ability to stretch, take the extra water? What's that gonna do? Is that gonna cause instability to earthquakes?
Well, that's why, so that concept is why I wanted to talk about why I included the idea of this pressurization, right? And so repressurizing the aquifer, right? Remember I said, when we have a confined portion, we have a water level that is above that tan colored line, right? Our water level starts above there, okay? Because we call it pressure level there, the potentiometric surface. So what would happen most likely when you put more water into the aquifer is that you would increase that pressure level, right? There is a certain pressure level that the aquifer could handle because it has so many other layers on top, right? The pressures down in the earth are actually fairly high that deep, right? You can calculate it and you can predict that. And so when you pump into a confined aquifer like this, you partially have to overcome some pressure, right? And you're actually, repressurizing the aquifer. Now, in these confined aquifers, you all have talked about subsidence a bit, and what's the risk of subsidence? From what I understand, this area, the risk is fairly low, right? Thinking about this, it's sort of like a reverse subsidence that we would be worried, right? And so that risk could be calculated. So I would say it's potentially managed, but it needs to be checked.
I'm still confused about this oxygen thing because some anaerobic processes can also produce nasty chemicals.
This is true.
So how do you determine whether oxygen is bad or good, or anaerobic is bad or good?
Typically what we would do is we have to do a geochemical study, right? So what you're looking at is what are the minerals and the chemicals in the formation itself to start with. What are the chemicals in the water that would be coming in, and what are the chemicals, what's dissolved, what has been in contact with the formation, and then maybe what's dissolved from the formation into the ground, right? So you take all three of those and you do a geochemical mixing model.
Okay, so that leads to the question
Mhm.
of ASRs. And there's been a lot of considerations, talked about a lot of different things.
Mhm.
So there must be a list of criteria of what would be a good place for an ASR and what would be a bad place. A priori, you could determine.
If you had that data. The crucial problem here is that all of this geochemical type data is something that is not collected as relatively as readily as we would hope. It's not, we don't have statewide maps of the geochemistry of the formation. I wish we did, but
So what you're saying,
ASR is kind of shot in the dark. If you agree with something like that.
That would not be for me to say. I'm concerned with the scientific and technical portions of it. It needs a lot of study if you're going to do it. And you're going to do it the way you want to make sure that the aquifer is not being degraded. There are places that have done that in the way, but there are places where it has not gone well, and some of those places are where there hasn't been a lot of problem.
So in your scientific educated opinion, what,
Don't fall for it, Gretchen.
what do you think about the homework that's been done with regard to ASR criteria for where Austin is proposing an ASR?
I think there's a lot of homework to be done.
So would ASR interfere with just the natural recharge of the aquifer?
I wouldn't say it would interfere. The aquifers only really recharge in the up dip portions. So those layers, and that was another important factor why we talk about outcrop versus down dip. The outcrop is going to be the only area where a river could interact with the groundwater, or just infiltration could come in, right? Because all of the other, if we're talking about that one layer, all of the other aquifers above it, prevent water from coming down into it. So in that sense, you're typically very much right. ASR systems don't usually go into the outcrop formations. They're usually in the back. So that's not typically a concern that it's going to interfere with natural recharge. It could change slightly how much water communicates between two aquifers. So that's a possibility that if you change the gradient, you can change what direction water might be flowing across all those different defining layers. Direction here.
And a lot of this, they just don't know. They just don't know.
The city of Austin's track record is not too good on water quality.
They would be injecting disinfected water, treated water, correct? Non treated water. And there's a possibility of a generation of disinfection byproducts, right? Yes. So how often and how would that be checked?
And how treated is it?
That's it.
The next agenda item, that's that next agenda item.
We want,
Yeah, let's, yeah.
Yes.
On this particular one,
Mhm.
is this still evolving?
It can, yeah. We
This
can.
is not set in stone, it's still.
That's true. And every time we get a new well, it could potentially be now this version, we have set a version and we haven't necessarily been asked to refine this. But in the future, it certainly is an evolvable thing. We could work through it. If we have good data, good quality data that we know we can define the aquifer on, and it certainly could be changed.
No, I'm asking, is it natural? It's still evolving all the way. There's a
Oh, I'm
difference
so
to
sorry.
grow.
I thought you meant the model itself.
Oh, no.
It
And
is,
how rapid
it is eroding.
Evolving, growing, floating.
I think the thing that's the most dynamic here is going to be the alluvium, right? Because that's what's happening, floods still happen, right, along Colorado. So that is the portion that would be the most dynamic. Over our lifetimes, we won't see these changes. But it is, it is always changing and it's no longer in a deposition. Because we're so far from the coast.
But I've read that the way in the future, the Gulf is expected to go further out. And so that's the position, it's now underwater. They're part of the so
That's true. Mhm.
but
Yes, so,
with all the icebergs.
yeah, the coast is gonna be a place.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Dr. Miller. We'll move on with agenda item 4C, discussion, consideration, and possible action on the City of Austin's aquifer storage and recovery project in Bastrop County, and memorandum of understanding and associated hydrological and legal services. So let me give a little bit of background on this. Greg Ellis contacted me about 2 weeks ago. He asked me to attend a meeting at the Capitol that Representative Curtis was gathering. Representative Curtis got the stakeholders involved. Two Bastrop County Commissioners, Commissioner Carmack is here tonight. Thank you for attending. Commissioner Glass from Bastrop attended. We had folks from Aqua Water, representatives from the Austin Water. Mayor Watson was there, myself, and Andy Weir representing Sawdust was there. So at that meeting, I could say that the big operative word of the day for that meeting was partnership. City of Austin and Austin Water wanted to partner with the stakeholders. They would like us to work with them to coordinate their field testing and to have a stake in the types of tests, the amount of tests, the criteria for success. So upon that first initial meeting, we decided to have another meeting and bring in our hydrologists. So we met yesterday, and Aqua had Mr. Keister representing them, and Dr. Miller was there as well. And they continued, they shared, City of Austin shared with us their timeline and a high-level test plan, which there was lots of questions and a lot of questions and concerns were raised, similar to the concerns that you've raised here today. So that was yesterday. And the next meeting for the hydrologists, they're meeting again on Thursday. And the bigger group is meeting on Monday, this upcoming Monday. So definitely Representative Curtis, as you all know, he has a House bill that he introduced that we supported. And that House bill prohibits ASR in Bastrop and Lee County. So I believe Mr. Gertis is still going to pursue that in committee. I believe on either the 23rd of April or the 30th of April, that bill, I believe, would come up at the committee. So with that, the City of Austin and Austin Water, they were nice enough to come here today to speak about this. And so I'd like to give them an opportunity to present themselves and the project and the status of where we are.
Thank you so much. I'm Emily Chancellor, and I'm in the Public Information Office at Austin Water, so I handle communications and outreach. Thank you, President Hernandez, for inviting us here. We're really grateful to Representative Gertis for putting together the stakeholder group and really challenging us to work together to work towards a partnership framework and to look at how this project could be done and how we could create benefits in Bastrop County. And we're committed to that. And we're really grateful for your time and for folks coming together. I just wanted to speak on behalf of Austin Water and our director and share a little bit with you about commitments Austin Water has made in the spirit of partnership and looking to create benefits here in Bastrop County. So first, we've said that we would put more water in the aquifer than we'll take out. So we've said at least 5% of the water we put in would stay there, would not be recovered. We've also said we will not use eminent domain to acquire property. Our mayor said that at the meeting at the Capitol last week, and that's one of our commitments. We've also said that land agreements would be structured so that families would get compensation for either purchase or lease, and also would have the option to stay on the land and continue farming and ranching operations. So that's a commitment that we've made. We've said that ultimately when the project's constructed, we would have monitoring wells and that data would be shared. And then we've talked more recently too about during the testing phase, sharing all of that data. And my colleague will talk a little bit more about that aspect. We also want to learn about the local water needs, and we are committed to working and considering partnerships that could provide water supply for local needs through this project. And so we want to hear from you all and other stakeholders about what the needs are and discuss how the project can provide water supply. We also just this week talked about that we will have a local education component, including a center where students or really anyone who's interested can learn more about water. So we talked about a location that would be built for that. So I want to just reiterate on behalf of our director and our department that we are here to work. We're here to hear these concerns, and we want to hear from you all here and in other meetings about what you'd like to see in a partnership framework to work together. And now I'll introduce Melissa Flores Gonzalez. So she's our supervisor over our water resources team, and she's more on the technical side. So she'll be able to answer this. Sure.
You made it sound like this is gonna be a done project. You didn't use the word if.
Okay. That's a good point. So I'm trying to be precise with my words, but I appreciate you giving me the chance to address that. We want to work together on this partnership framework for sure. And there are phases in our project that our director has referred to as sort of off ramps. Marisa will talk about that a little bit more because many of the concerns that you've brought up, we also have the same concerns. And so there's a testing phase where we want to see results in a lab before we're moving on to other phases. So there are definitely various junctions that would determine if the project moves forward. So thanks for giving me the chance to clarify that. Sure. Yeah. Anything else that I could clarify?
I have a quick question. You said no eminent domain. How are you gonna get the water line down here from Austin?
You know, I don't have all the answers to that, but I can tell you that that's the commitment that our mayor's made and that our city is standing by. Okay. Thank you.
My name is Marisa Flores Gonzalez, and I'm the supervisor of the water team at Austin Water. I'd like to give just a brief overview of Austin and the project and where it stands right now. So far, we've concluded a desktop analysis that looked at possible ASR locations to identify the most valuable location. That desktop analysis used spatial data files in a geographic information system and computer. A spatial mapping application on the computer to identify that most viable location. And so far, we've identified a location in Bastrop County in the Carrizo Wilcox office. The location we've identified is the corner portion of Bastrop County, several miles south. The total well field area estimated right now is subject to change and field testing and other phases of the project is around 7,000 acres. Like Dr. Miller mentioned, we agree that there is a lot of work still yet to be done on this project. And like Emily mentioned, this is what it does if it's within phases. So we did this initial desktop analysis. We wanted to work with this partnership framework within Bastrop to move into what we call phase 1, exploratory drilling and field. That exploratory drilling and field testing phase, we expect could take from 36 to 42 minutes. And during that time, we would include 12 months for planning, design, bidding services, and approximately 12 months samples would be tested within a laboratory setting to understand baseline geochemistry. We would not be injecting any water into the aquifer during this phase of the project, so that would be, again, for this 36 to 42-month duration. That laboratory testing, native groundwater core sample and core samples would also include testing of groundwater, native groundwater with Austin water, what we call finished water. So that water, after it has been treated to drinking water standards. We would have several different permutations of Austin water, finished water, varying pH, varying other characteristics of water to test what those interactions are. And the outcome of that testing is to understand what potential interactions and what further treatment may be required for Austin water, finished water, before it can be safely injected under the to make sure that we prevent any sort of adverse reactions within the future. As a part of this field testing process, our intent, stated with several conversations now with partners, would be to share all of the results from that field testing. We've also talked about sharing our protocols and methods for actually accomplishing that field testing. And we've shared field testing plan. We've already received great feedback from Fast-Track partners, including Dr. Meller, Mr. Totten, President Hernandez, and others, and we're wanting to incorporate that within field testing plans moving forward. We look forward to further technical conversations to incorporate that into the plan. We are going to be working side by side with stakeholders through this process. And like Emily mentioned, based on the results of this field testing analysis, a go or no go determination would be made on whether to proceed into the next phase of the project, which would be pilot testing. During that pilot testing phase, we anticipate that that could be another 36 months or 3 years, depending on the results of field testing. We would be drilling potentially one or more pilot wells where we would have treating water to the appropriate water quality and then injecting it underground to test water quality, operational, and other parameters of the pilot ASR facility. Then again, at the end of this pilot testing phase, we would learning a lot, and we would make a determination on whether to go or no go into the following phase of the ASR project. That following phase, or phase 3 as we call it, would be full-scale ASR design and construction. So we recognize that this is a complex project. There is a lot to learn and understand, and there are lots of relationships that need to be built for this project to be successful. It's also a significant investment in Austin water, and we want to make sure that any project that we move forward with is a success, which is why we're going to take this deliberate and thoughtful approach, working closely with partners and stakeholders, being as transparent as we can be, and making sure that we are making the right decisions for this project as it proceeds through this whole process. So I guess with that, I pause and
What the location was, or so like, what is it, the closest town or city or like?
yeah, so the closest small town with the area that we're looking at right now is let's say several miles south of Page. But again, that location and the feasibility of an ASR project is really dependent on the conditions in that particular location, as Dr. Thorne had mentioned. So that's really why it depends on that.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. How big of a geographical area did you look at? How many political jurisdictions did that cover?
The area that we looked at included Travis County and all of the counties surrounding Travis County, so all of the counties
So the Austro metropolitan area.
pretty much, I think there were about 9 counties in the study areas that we looked at.
Okay, and did you rate locations to, I mean, I'm trying to get down, why is this location being the best at this point?
Sure.
And are there other locations that based on what's found could be looked at as well?
So we used a few different criteria to evaluate locations. The criteria that we used included criteria related to hydrology, cost, operations, and implementation factors. Some of them, like specific hydrogeology criteria, included recovery efficiency, the max recovery rate, max storage capacity, and time to refill ASR. And all of this was calculated based on available data, based on data collected from agencies and entities like Texas Water Development Board, studies that hydrologists and geohydrologists have performed. I'm sure that Dr. Muller contributed to studies and data that we used to perform. Again, this was just done on a desktop level. We haven't been able to yet collect any information on the ground. We wanted to perform this desktop analysis first, using spatial data, identify the kind of highest, the most viable options using that spatial analysis, and then move into potentially the next phase of data.
Thank you.
What about, have you looked at the economic feasibility of this? You're gonna have to acquire rights of way. You're gonna have to move quantities of water from Austin out to here and treat it. And then you have to bring it out and move it back there.
Right.
How could that possibly be economically feasible?
One of the big benefits of this project is that we're able to increase our storage of water. So the city of Austin would be taking water from its existing water rights and contracts, our Colorado River and Hunter Lake supplies, and we would be dishing that to make it safe for injection if this project proceeds. And then that water would come from where it's stable evaporation, experience a significant amount of evaporation of surface water during summertime, during hot, dry weather. And then we can pull that water out to use during drought or other periods. In the operations of this project have not been determined to depend on many factors and things which are going along the way. That said, so it stretches our existing, and it is still a significant investment. Like you mentioned, the estimated project cost right now, and more calculated budget $1.5 billion.
Billion with a B?
Billy?
There was there was a spot in Travis County identified a couple of years ago as also a possibility. Is that talked about being utilized at all?
We, I'm not aware of it. The study done within Austin within the last several years. Maybe it
Well,
was,
this is 22.
okay.
When they mentioned that there was one.
It's
It's north of the city.
I do know that there have been looks at doing ASR within. We also looked at ASR as a potential location for us. That project location in Travis County or in any of the areas within Travis County would eventually be as a storage for the field that we would need from a project like this for it to pencil out. But if you're going to make a significant investment to have the cost benefit kind of balance out, we would need to have water from that. So there's also a prohibition against injection of water through the Edwards Aquifer, which applies across Travis County.
So how many injection wells are you talking?
In this project, for the current size of the project, we're looking at max potential
70.
And I mentioned 7,000 acres of the surface impact would potentially be about 200 acres for well field, for well sites and
Who's the principal landowner in the project?
We still need to work through how we would secure control of the land surface. So we, like Emily mentioned, committed as a city to not using eminent domain for this project.
But who owns most of the property where you're gonna put these wells?
Oh, I see. Because we haven't done the field testing and haven't determined the, where exactly doing this project, we haven't identified who that, who those, that, on the list of property owners.
Yeah, y'all aren't, y'all are always so goddamn secretive when y'all come down here with these ideas. And you won't tell us who the landowners are, or what major landowner it is, or about eminent domain or anything like that. And I can tell you, my personal opinion, the whole project stinks. And that's my personal feeling.
We'll just reiterate, committed to not.
We'll ask you about eminent domain, and you say, we're committed, we're not gonna do it. Well, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, you're young enough to not have been around when the Fed power plant was built. Austin was partner. They weren't going to use eminent domain, get the lines from the plant to Austin. Well, they had a little secret there. They had a deal with LCRA. They got easements for the power line from LCRA. And they started building power lines because people would not give them easements. Guess what? Shut down because they had no right to be on that property because LCRA did not have the right, power, or ownership to give the easement to somebody else. Now, granted, Austin won the war. They used eminent domain to get their power line from the plant to Austin.
Who will be mayor when this project goes live to do that? May not be the same one.
So the status on this project is that they have not yet applied for a TCEQ permit. And my understanding is that they cannot until after the phase 1B. So it looks like maybe 3 years from now is when they would be applying for a TCEQ permit. So that's just an update as to where they are at regarding the permit. Yeah. So the purpose of this item was that to let everybody be informed of these meetings and to give the okay to fund LRE, working with Aqua and working with the city of Austin. What we were asked by Curtis's office was to work towards a memorandum of understanding.
I mean, how much money do you got to fund them with? I think we need more information before we commit any funds.
Yeah, I mean, right now, the Representative Curtis is still working his bill, and that's still working through committee. And so he put together the stakeholder project and asked the stakeholders to work towards some. Now, I have my questions as to, we can't in 2 weeks create a memo of understanding, right? That's not going to happen. And so the question is, yeah, exactly.
We moved kind of slow.
And so the ball really is in Representative Curtis's court in terms of how to move next. But he has asked us to work through the process for now.
So I'm missing something. I'm confused. And maybe not surprising. So Curtis has a bill to stop ASRs for Bastrop County
In Lee County.
and Lee County, but he's asked us to work and partnership to allow that to happen.
Yep, mixed messages, correct. That is correct.
I think we see what happens to his bill.
But plus, we don't even have a budget.
Yeah.
We don't have any money.
You're not using it you've got all these, what is it, 700,000 acres?
7,000.
7,000. Problem, you're putting water into this aquifer that is much larger, 7,000 acres, which would affect everybody that gets the water out of that aquifer, correct? It's not just this little spot. It's gonna contaminate. Am I understanding? Well, why would it not?
That transmissivity that Dr. Miller was referring to, the transmissivity and how fast does it spread?
They put pumps around it too to control the pressure differential.
I'm just feeling like we're.
I'm just
Well,
feeling
we
like-
were just, yeah, I mean, we were asked to provide input and to review their materials and to provide input. And so
I have one last question. How many acre feet of water do you plan to check per year?
That would, again, depend on the results of the field testing and. So
But
the
you
field
must
testing
have
is
some
not
idea of
final.
the range.
So, yes, the, potential and, could I follow up with that?
Sure.
isn't the maximum 100,000 acre feet in the end state in 2080 by 2080?
The storage. Would
Storage.
be quite a bit. It would, and I rechecked that number, the maximum storage, could potentially be up to 300,000 acre feet by 2080. But can I check on the?
Yeah, and,
Okay.
okay, so, but a follow-up question. San Antonio Water System has an ASR, and they use their ASR mainly as a reserve and a buffer during times of drought. So they've got their water in their ASR, and it's sitting there, sort of storage, and they're gonna use it for emergency. You, Austin, I get the impression that you're not so much using it as a reserve in case of drought, but you're going to be using it consistently. 95%, you said 5% would remain.
We would not be consistently pulling out 95% of the water that was stored. So the recovery rate would be less than the total storage of the aquifer. And based on our conversations with SAWS, we have talked to them in the past to, learn from their experience. They originally built their ASR with the idea that it would be long-term storage, and they have changed their operations to use it in a more cyclical way, partially because they're trying to drift of water and also to help offset heat demands and helping citywide demands. It would, again, the operations would be dependent on what we find, and we would want to work with partners and draw from others' expertise as well and develop their operational plans for an ASR facility. But it may make more sense to withdraw some amount of water on a more frequent basis and to prevent drift of that water, excessive drift of that water, and then to also water moving through pipes and to exercise equipment. Yeah. And let me get you that range.
I was just curious,
Yes.
You said you're using existing water rights on the Colorado River. How big is that water right? Do you know, or how much of it would?
So we would not be using all of our available water supply. The city of Austin has access to up to 325,000 acres via a combination of our state granted water rights as well as a contract for backup water from the Highland Lakes that we have with our area. And last year, we were about 108,000 acre feet of water. And before that, we just last year. But we would be looking to withdraw water that would, not again up to that 325,000 drawing smaller amounts of water. And then, starting to kind of condition the aquifer within a full-scale ASR project, seeing how the aquifer would react as we move to injection. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Are we good? This is, again, just FYI to let you know what of the meetings that I attended, and just to bring everybody up to speed. All right, we will then move on to item 4D, discussion, consideration, and possible action on the 2024 management plan objectives and goals update. Mr. Todd.
Yes, sir. Can we go ahead and do 4D and E at the same
Yeah,
time?
4D, D is
Really should have been-
discussion, consideration, and possible action on the fall 2024 desired future conditions, well monitoring update. Yeah, both of these items were discussed, were on our agenda last month. And last month we received hard copies and some folks provided comments, and those have been incorporated.
Okay, thank you for finding the two displaced apostrophes in the opening sentence.
Think nothing else.
Other mistakes of my own. So the version that you have will have a couple of minor tweaks. I've left some editing marks in a couple of tables that need to be cleaned out, but for the 2024 reporting period, as far as exempt wells go, the growth in exempt wells is more or less exactly on trend for what we've seen in past years. 151 total new exempt wells were permitted within the district. We've been seeing in between a 5 and I'd say 7% growth in exempt wells over the past 4 to 5 years. So that number falls within the range of what we've expected. With the non-exempt wells, we didn't really have any new permits that were issued last year. Is that right? We actually have a year without any permits.
Might have been.
But table 3 does show the permitted usage. What we see in terms of trending is that historically we've seen the majority of our permit holders produce between 20 and 30% of their permits on an annual basis. And that trend continued to track in the previous year. Aqua WSC was closer to 36%. Some of the more industrial users were closer, had a higher percentage of usage, but for most of our water supply corporations, municipalities, they were in that 20 to 30% range we typically expect to see. We did have fairly good weather conditions last year. As you recall, the first half of the year was remarkably wet, relatively cool. The figures 3 shows the drought distribution. You can see that rolling into early 2024, basically drought conditions across Lee and Bastrop County both vanished, only to come back again in late September and then rolling through the end of the year. That absence of drought conditions, the cool weather and high rainfall kind of helped drive a lower demand for groundwater across the district. That demand did come back, unfortunately, as the drought started set back in later in the year. With regard to exports from the district, something new that we started tracking since the user board chose to update our rules to re-implement the export fees for the district. So you can see in table 4 a breakdown of the water that's exported from the district, either under transport permits or by permit holders who under our rules don't have to have a transport permit to move water into counties. By and large, these numbers are relatively low, with Manville being the largest water exporter at 2,400 acre feet exported during the year. Second to that is the city of Hutto, which is a purely export permit. Anything that they produce obviously is being exported to Hutto. So they've produced just under half of their permit last year and exported that from the district. The remaining export permits, Aqua Water Supply Corporation, City of Elgin, and Lee County Water all produced relatively small amounts of water that were moved out of the counties under their existing operating permits. And then, of course, Recharge, LCRA, and Gatehouse have yet to be in operation, so they do not currently have export fees or exported water. The take home, I think here, I've heard several board members, again, is looking at what we see in table 5, which is a breakdown of production for non-exempt wells relative to the model available groundwater. I understand that the language in the initial draft was a little confusing, so I tried to clear that up. But if you look at, say, in table 5 for the Simsboro, in 2024, we had roughly 22,000 acre feet of water produced from the Simsboro. The current DFC, the model available groundwater derived from the current DFC says MAG for the 2020 decade is 20,000 acre feet per year. So we're about 10% above what the annual production according to the MAG would be in Simsboro. If you go back and look at the previous DFC, which was adopted using an older model, there, just for comparison's sake, it shows that in the same time period, the models available groundwater on an annual basis during this decade would be 32,000 acre feet. So based on the new model, our current production is slightly exceeding the MAG for this decade. Based on the older model, we're still well below that MAG. And as we roll into 2030, what you will see is that MAG does increase in 2030 up to, I believe, 32,000 acre feet off the top of my head. But there is an increase in the MAG as we move forward in the later decades. So the fact that we have exceeded the MAG this year and in previous years, that doesn't put us out of compliance with the DFCs. All that means is that we are on a track where we may have a problem with DFCs in the future. We'll just need to keep a closer watch on production and water levels and see if curtailment in the future is necessary if the production rates continue to exceed the MAGs as we move through each decade. So that's kind of the key take home in regard to non-exempt production. Section 3 goes through all the management goals. If you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to address those, but I won't take up the time going through each one of those one by one. And then section 4 goes into the district specific goals. Again, we can go through those if you have any particular questions. And then finally, section 5 goes into water level monitoring summary. And again, the language is a little bit unclear, so I tried to clean up the language in the table showing that the first column is the difference between the spring and the fall measurements in 2024. The second column shows the difference between the 2024 measurements and the 2023 spring measurement. And then the final column is the difference between 2024 and 2023 fall measurements. So you can see how the water levels changed across the year, and then year-on-year changes in each formation as well. Kind of keep track of how things are behaving across time. And I think I've already hit kind of the major conclusion, which was again based on the MAG in Simsboro, which is the only formation where we really have an issue with production relative to the MAG. Exceeding the current MAG is indicative that we need to keep an eye on production going forward. Keep a closer eye on the water levels because we may have a problem with DFC compliance further down the road because of that production. But for right now, historically, Bill does the DFC compliance report, so we'll have him follow that up in the fall. But for right now, we are still well within compliance on our formations.
Questions?
Yes, quick question. Recharge for Gatehouse has not done anything. But whenever they start up an FLR, how many years do you think we are out from seeing any, big production?
Within the district?
Yes, within the district, right on our boundaries.
Those are two different questions. So Gatehouse, the last I saw for Gatehouse, their production timeline looked like 2031 was when they were looking to come online. So 5 years for Gatehouse. Recharge has a little bit of a head start on Gatehouse. They might be coming online late 2029, but I don't have anything definitive on that. Outside of the district, those projects should be coming online over the next, depending on which project you're talking about, whether it's the SLR project, moving water.
That's my main.
Yes, sir. I know they've done all their pump testing, and so they should be online relatively quickly, I would expect. And then same thing for the GPRA and AWRA projects down in Caldwell County. So it's Vista Ridge Part 2 down in Bastrop County. It's more Carrizo wells right along the county line, moving water to I-35.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
We
talked about putting some dates in here to finish these things. How's that coming along?
I need to work with the management committee to kind of figure out what timelines I want to see on this. So, and in the GM report, I also have something else from the management committee. So we have mutual homework going on that one.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's in progress. We had to wait until we got their final annual production to write the initial letter. Now it's going back. I'm hoping to have it wrapped up. The governance committee or management committee has proposed some rules that would kind of lay out fee structures for violations of rules. And so that could be factored in and kind of help codify that going forward. There,
We're just a little over four.
yeah, there is a slight typo. They ended up at two, let's see. Yeah, they ended up 274 out of a permit of 224. So about 20% exceedance, was what they ended up at. And when it originally came up in November, they had that was their October readings in November. And so they had just started to exceed that permit. And so then there were 3 months to follow that. But the final number was at 270.
Right, any other questions? Not, we don't need a motion or anything, we're good, right? Okay.
I'll make a couple of minor corrections. We'll get this on the website tomorrow.
Oh, wait, no.
All right, item 4F, discussion, consideration, possible action on a draft budget amendment. And again, we reviewed this last month and the finance committee met to discuss some questions that we had. And Jim, any update on that?
Those are I think the takeaway from the discussion last month and the discussion with the finance committee is that if we do choose to go this route, taking money out of the Texas pool's interest to pay for these projects, it'd be done on a quarterly draw. We can adjust that quarterly draw if needed based on when other revenues are coming in, so we can maintain operating funds at our normal levels, but it would not be a 100% withdrawal right off the bat. It would be just pulling from tax bill as needed to kind of balance our operating reserves versus other expenditures. And you were correct. There was that version of the budget you were looking at. There was a 200,000 that had been left out, but that's not in the version that was adopted by the board. It included that 200,000, and this version of the draft, the 2025 budget, we're fully accounted for.
It just wasn't appropriate.
Right, and that was not the version that was adopted. I'm not sure where that 200,000 went on that, but we don't have that situation this year.
So I will entertain a motion on the budget amendment.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion by Director Semang and seconded by Director Burgess. All those in favor to adopt the budget amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Item 4G, discussion, consideration, and possible action on auditor request for qualifications in the recommendation. Mr. Cotton.
Thank you, sir. We had posted the RFQ for auditing services, and similar to previous times, we actually did send direct requests to, I think it was 3 different firms, which is different from what we've done in the past where we just posted the RFQ. But still, we received a single response, which was from our current auditor, Singleton and Clark. The Singleton and Clark team turns over on about an every 2 to 3 year basis. So while we've had the same firm doing the audits, the actual auditors that come in and review the books change, I can say, about every 2 to 3 years. So it may be under the same banner, but the overall work and the evaluation by the district is being done by relatively new teams, which is, I know, one of the financial controls that people look for. So the recommendation, I believe, of the budget committee was for this year, we go ahead and retain Singleton Clark and move forward. And then we can consider reposting and trying to go out for another RFQ later if we'd like to try and get more options for future years.
I said move.
All right, motion by Director Rogers, seconded by Director Smith. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Committee reports with possible board discussion. No action will be taken. Financial Services Committee. Mr. May, can you provide a quick update on our meeting?
I think basically what this.
Yeah, exactly. We discussed the budget.
And the auditor.
Yeah, the budget and the auditor. So both those items were on the agenda. So that was basically it. Okay. The governance committee, we did meet on April 2nd. We planned for today's meeting. We planned the management plan updates and the DFC well report updates. The presentation that was given today by LRE, we confirmed that. And we spoke the need to have a budget amendment agenda item and the auditor RFQ agenda item. So all those were on the agenda for today. In addition, we discussed director emails. Jim will get into that in the GM report. But I believe we now all have emails officially in the Lost Pines email domain. Pumping file update. So at the GMA 12 meeting for next week, there'll be a presentation on the updated pumping file. Dr. Miller has been working with the other hydrologists, the GMA 12, for all the GCBs put in all their new permits in the pumping file. And that model run will be presented next week at the GMA 12. Website RFP, we discussed that we did not need a website of RFP, but we could solicit bids without an RFP. And so we were going to pursue that for the website. Darling Industries, we just reviewed that today. And discussed how the letter was sent out to Darling, and we're awaiting their response. And then the meeting requested by Representative Curtis that I attended State Capitol, that was on the April 7th. And then we met yesterday, as I mentioned. That's the update from the Governance Committee. Next up, we have the Infrastructure Committee.
The Infrastructure Committee did not meet, but we have a few updates. Jim will touch on some of these. I'm trying to see which ones I don't want to duplicate. We still have to put in the old water level data into our database. We haven't done that yet. We're decided on, for now, it's going to be changed that TDS, sodium nitrate, iron, and sulfur will be added from our water quality tests as they come in. Roofer, have you gotten back with me?
We've gotten the quote for a repair, which is not what we asked for. We asked for a quote on a replacement. So we haven't gotten the replacement quote yet, but
So he thinks it just needs repair.
his initial response was that it could be repaired and did not need to be replaced, but we asked him to go back and bring us another quote for a full replacement. So as soon as we have those, we'll get into the Infrastructure Committee.
And Claire has met with landscapers, and that's sort of underway. Hopefully we'll see some changes before long.
You don't enjoy the weed patch around the building? Native grass.
Native grasses. There you go. All right, next up, Education and Outreach Committee. Claire Marks.
Cool. So we had 233 entries for our student art contest. I was so excited. We had 9 different schools from Bastrop County and Lee County that participated. Those are the names of 3 winners. Our category 1 was kindergartners and 3rd graders. And we had Loretto Garner from Smithville. Then we had category 2, which is 4th grade through 6th grade. And Lorelei Reagan from Lexington Middle School won that one. And then category 3 was 7th grade through 12th grade. And we have Lainey Hannah from Smithville. If you want to see the entries, the winning entries, they are available on our Facebook and our Instagram in a video. They're also available on our website If you go to our student art contest webpage on our website, there'll be a slideshow that will slide and show you all the great entries. It was really hard to choose. It was fantastic. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Our educational garden bed. So it starts on Monday. They're gonna tear out everything. I'm gonna get rid of all those ugly stumps and weeds. After that, they're going to, our theme is trying to make it xeriscaping. We don't want to use water in the future. So it's gonna be rocks. On this backside, we're gonna have all rocks. On this side, we're gonna have rocks with a few native plants. And then on the front side, we're gonna have rocks with a lot more native plants. At our corners here, we're gonna have 2 rain barrels that we will use. We'll have signs throughout the garden bed, teaching the students about native plants, about rainwater harvesting. So it will dual as something that's pretty for the outside of our office and something that the public can learn from as well. We have 2 new models. One we purchased and we've already received a new watershed model. This is something I'm going to bring to either events, tabling events, or workshops with children. It's a huge plastic model and it shows how water moves throughout a watershed and how pollution can affect water in a watershed. And then we have our porosity model. A video of that is up on our Facebook and our Instagram. It's so cool. I'm really happy with it. Shout out to Aqua for helping us. So because I took a video of the porosity model and posted it, we had a phone call from someone who said, I just saw that video and I was wondering if you could come to the Giddings 4th grade field day and bring that with you. So we're gonna bring that with us to the Giddings 4th grade field day. We'll be one of the water stations. Well, there's gonna be many stations. We're the water station. So I'm really excited to showcase that at the field day. If you would like to come, let me know. And basically you'll just show up and hang out with kids for 4 hours or 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever works best for you. Let's see. Okay. This month, actually next month, sorry, May 12th, we have our scholarship ambassador program. It's due on May 12th. So if you know anyone who wants to do the water ambassador program, let them know to apply to that and then apply to us so they don't have to pay and we pay them to do the program. On May 17th, we have the Wildlife and Habitat Day at Bastrop State Park. It would be great if some of y'all could come out and we're gonna have a table there. I'll probably bring them one of our new models. And yeah, it'll be a fun day of learning with the public and just getting to meet them. Reminder, we have our Healthy Lawn Workshop on June 17th. And then we also have a photo voice contest June 30th. So that's due. Any questions? Yes, sir.
You talking about native plants. If I furnish the aloe veras that you might need for the area here, anywhere from 5 inches, 5 feet long.
Yeah.
Can I get out early for the man's?
We'll make a deal real quick. Hang on. Thanks, y'all.
All right, next committee, the management committee.
Okay, in addition to all of the board members on the management committee, for Jim Totten, Mark, Soleil, we're going to announce new business. GDHM presented draft language for the various proposed rules. Comments and direction for redrafts were given. B, comments and direction for redraft of the annual management report were given. D, printing of business cards. These board members discuss the matter will be taken up on the board meeting. Old business, all rules, update rules lists have been addressed by GDHM. B, Elvis presented a verbal summary of a meeting with Representative Stam Gertis and other parties regarding the aquifer storage and recovery proposals submitted by the city of Austin which would require a memorandum of understanding between the city of Austin and LPGCD to proceed. The matter will be taken up at the April board meeting. Next meeting for the management committee scheduled for May 13th. Questions, comments? Bless you
All right.
all.
Agenda item 4I, general manager report. No action will be taken. Mr. Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'm going to begin by apologizing. I was trying to do way too many things this morning, apparently. The dates for the exempt well statistic should be March 1st through March 30th, not February 1st to February 28th. But the numbers are correct. It is 10 and 1 for new wells and registering exempt wells. Water quality tests performed during the period 3, 12 wells were engaged, not including work performed by LRE during this period. As you can see, the drought conditions for Lee County remain relatively unchanged from where they were in January of this year. Although in Bastrop County, they have escalated from being predominantly in the state of D1 moderate drought to now the majority of the county at 81% in D2 severe drought. After 2 months of what drought conditions not changing, I've started cross-referencing drought.gov with the University of Nebraska Lincoln's drought measurements, just to make sure that we're actually, well, making sure that they didn't fire everybody at drought.gov. So the numbers do line up within about a tenth of a percentage point. So I am comfortable with that, but I will continue using both sources going forward. As previously mentioned, GMA 12 is scheduled to meet next week. I've attached a copy of the agenda for the meeting to the board. So if you have any questions prior to the meeting, please let me know.
Also, if you're planning on attending, can you let Jim know just so that we make sure we don't have a quorum?
That hasn't been a problem in a while, but yes, yeah, anybody that does feel like going to Milano and
I'm going.
Yeah.
let's try it either way. It's in the, we've got something else that'll require an email to Peggy anyway, so we'll just bundle all that together. If you want to go, email Peggy, please.
Does a Zoom count as a forum?
No, sir.
No,
Yes.
I don't think it does. I
I
think
don't
just
think it
physically, no, they
Yeah.
take this physically. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm,
We can look into that.
I say Bobby or Natasha, y'all are online. Does Zoom compromise quorum?
Yes, we're here. Repeat the question. Is a quorum question?
That if we have, say, 4 board members that go to Milano for region, for GMA 12, and then we have 2 more that are watching online, would we have a problem with a quorum, or is a quorum only physically present or something like that?
Well, I mean, technically you haven't noticed it as a meeting, but there's the potential that for a quorum. So I would post a notice of potential quorum for that meeting, and then there not be any district business discussed.
Okay, I think we've got one of those on file, so we can just update the place and location if we need to. Okay.
Yes, Peggy has a template.
But she didn't answer the question though.
Two people online.
Not the most
Well,
lawyer-
the 2 people, I mean, Elvis, I mean, they could, I think there's a response that technically it's not an appropriate virtual meeting because, you know, you've got to notice it a certain way. But I think that if you've got a quorum in person and 2 online, that's normally what you have to have participation online for an open meeting. But it sounds like you won't have a quorum in person. I would rather err on the side of caution and do that notice of potential quorum.
There's the answer.
That's the answer.
Okay, thank you. Short.
Thank you, Natasha.
You're welcome. I should have let Bobby take that one.
If you'd like to attend, please let Peggy know, and if we need to post a notice of possible quorum, we will do so.
Okay.
Attached to the general manager's report, there is the login information for the new district emails. My suggestion would be, for right now, log in via the website and update your passwords. And then once you've set the password to something you're comfortable with, we can work on getting that set up on your individual devices. What I don't want you to do is try and get it set up on your device, and then we change your password, and it'll be, I think, a little bit cleaner if we do it step by step. So for right now, if everybody can just log into the accounts, update the passwords, and once you've gotten that done, we can work with you on getting your individual devices set up as needed. So along those lines, Director Texter brought up the idea of business cards for the directors. If you are interested in having business cards printed up, please contact Peggy. Let her know what you would want on that card besides.
We designed.
You would do what?
Would we design them?
It would just be the same design as
It's a
everyone else.
standard design.
Although if you do have a design in mind, I'd like to see that. But no, you know, contact Peggy, let her know you're interested in cards, what you'd like on it. If you just want your email and your name, or if you want your phone number, we can, you know, y'all can sort those details out. We'll get those ordered, and hopefully in bulk and get it done.
They printed, had to mail to everybody instead of mine.
The work on the, as Director Cole noted, Director, you know, the work on the database is ongoing. We've reclassified the majority of the wells that were reported from the SDR. There were a lot of closed loop geothermal and environmental soil boring. Basically a whole bunch of wells that were drilled that were not traditional water wells that really had nothing to do with us, but they're in the system now. So we do have some, now that that's done, we do have some aggregates that need to be cross-matched with our existing wells to see if there are duplicates. So we're still whittling that down, but we're making progress on it. As of last week, I got another 160 or 180 water levels input into the system. I'm hoping to have that process finished up by the end of the month. So that'll clear our backlog, and then we'll just have to be on top of it going forward. Additionally, with Bill developing the new model for us, he's beginning to ask for water quality data. So we'll start working on getting the water quality into the system, focusing on the needs that he has for his model development first. So that's going to be more about geographic distribution than it is about time or anything else. But as we get those in for the model development process, we'll start filling that in, you know, using all the historical records that we do have. So, you know, one early push, and then it'll just kind of be done incrementally across the remainder of the summer. With regard to meetings, upcoming meetings, we have GMA 12 on the 23rd at Post Oak's office in Milano. Region K is doing their first hearing on the initially prepared plan in Austin tomorrow. I had planned on going to that, but now I will be at the ASR meeting for the technicians. So the next Region K hearing on the IPP is scheduled for the LCRA offices in LaGrange on May 7th, which will be the day after the Rambo hearing. That will be, I guess, my next opportunity to attend those. And then Region G has their hearing on the Region G initially prepared plan on May 6th. That will be at the Brazos River Authority offices in Waco, which is the day of the Rambo hearing, so I won't be at that one either. That is all the meetings that we have currently scheduled, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, seeing none, thank you. Item 4J, consideration of future agenda items. Any suggestions? Right. Have any at this moment? Sure we'll have some.
So I do have, I mentioned that I had homework for Director Texter. I need to do that before I forget.
Sure.
We have had a spate of calls about shared wells within the district. A lot of people looking to construct and share wells. Currently by district rules and by state law, an exempt well can't be shared between properties that are legally subdivided. Our rules reflect that, but we don't have anything in our rules beyond that it can't, you know, an exempt well can't be shared. So that may be some, I think it's happened 3 times in the past 10 years, and we've had, I think, 4 or 5 calls in the past week about it. It may be a blip, it may not be worth dealing with, but it may be something we want to think about and see if this is something that we need to address and catch our next rules update. So
We don't know how much property those people have. or
The
that we don't have
difficulty
any-
is when they go to sell the property
10
and
acres.
the legal.
yes, sir. Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. It's not something that I would ever encourage, but it is something that's still, nothing in our rules says it can't be done. It just can't be done with an exempt. So we need to firm up the rules around this idea. Is kind of what I'm suggesting. Anywhere between 20 acres, you know, 3 wells, you know, 3 lots on a 20-acre tract. I think was 6 lots on a 12-acre tract. So there's no consistency. I just haven't seen this come up so many times in such a short period, so.
We recommend the subdivisions, they need 10 acres for a well, something like that, or do
No.
we never talked about it?
No, because that would, I mean, that would completely destroy any concept of affordable housing in Bastrop counties at that point. But I mean, that's something we can revisit if y'all would like to. That could be.
If they have subdivision, I think they did. So,
Yeah, Director Texter, we can discuss it. Sure, go from there.
All right, so, back to item 4J, any consideration for future agenda items? All right, if not, then 4K, discussion, consideration, possible action on the district board meeting calendar. Anything from anybody? Nope, I don't have anything either, so then we'll, last item, item 4L, setting the date and location of the next meeting, be May 21st at 3:30 here in Giddings. As always, the third Wednesday month. So with that, we will adjourn at 5:34 PM. Thank you.